the minutes. Anybody have any changes to the minutes? All right, seeing none, those will stand approved as written. Does anybody have any questions about any of the consent items?
Ask a question since we have such a light agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Snow, how do we look?
Better after the weekend,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's showing up in the.
It is. So we were in the port. We hadn't gotten much snow, so we were kind of flatlining a little bit and just starting to be under the averages in all of our basins. But after the snow on the weekend, Arkansas is still under the average, but Colorado is up and the South Platte is about par now.
So you do have that recent weekend snow?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so South Platte's at like 99%. Upper Colorado is 109% for the Snowtail sites that are in our areas.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So I do have a follow-up on that, because can you remind me, are we about 50% of our resources are in the Arkansas basin, or what are the numbers there?
Generally speaking, though, we typically say 25 Arkansas, 25 Colorado, 50 South Platte.
Yeah, we're shifting a little bit, so you'll probably see us start talking about roughly half in the South Platte, roughly a quarter in the Colorado, and roughly a quarter in the Arkansas. I think the numbers are now down closer to 20% in the Arkansas, and maybe a little less than 20% there, a little more than 20% in the Colorado. So the South Platte is now, I think, up 57, 58%.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll do some math on some recent yields over the past few years and see if I can come up with a better percentage.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think I had the Platte and the Arkansas split in what I was thinking. Oh, and we're hearing some static from my computer, which is probably literally the fan on this laptop. So I apologize. I will have it muted when I am not talking. So any other questions for the consent agenda?
Nope.
Right, seeing none, we'll go ahead with the Aero 70 reimbursement agreement with Jenny Wynn.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Wynn and I'm a utility review engineer in the Planning and Engineering Division. I'm here to present the Aero 70 reimbursement agreement. As you can see on my screen over here, here's a project overview. So the Aero 70 project is located at approximately I-70 and North Powhatan Road in Ward 2. The reimbursement agreement is going to be between the City of Aurora and United Properties and is for a 16-inch water line in Smith Road and a 12 to 15-inch sanitary sewer along I-70. So here's a closer look at those reimbursements. The southern portion will be the sanitary and the northern in Smith Road is the 16-inch water line. There's going to be about 4,500 linear feet of 16-inch water pipeline with a not to exceed number of $398,619.72. Along I-70, there's going to be about 5,200 feet of sanitary sewer with a not to exceed value of $382,149.74. The combined not to exceed value of these two projects is $780,769.46. These not to exceed numbers represent the difference in the amount needed to construct the infrastructure only for this site and the amount needed to construct the slightly larger infrastructure that Aurora Water needs in this region, which we would consider a regional benefit. So this cost includes design, construction, all materials, 10% contingency, and a 3-year warranty. Payouts to the developer will be made after the initial acceptance of the infrastructure and after review of invoices to find the actual cost of the construction to the developer. Actual reimbursed costs will not exceed the fees paid to Aurora Water in this area for the sewer and water connections. Do you have any questions?
Councilmember Bergan, any questions?
No.
Councilmember
Okay.
Medina?
And does council support moving this project forward to the March 10th council meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, although I would like, just for the benefit of Councilmember Medina, who hasn't been on the committee in the past, if we could just run down a little bit kind of how we determine whether or not we're going to do developer reimbursement agreements on this type of infrastructure, and how we decide whether or not something is, for example, too far out of what Aurora Water would plan to do anyway, such that we may say, actually, no, like you're trying to build things so far out that it doesn't make sense for us.
For sure. So in our water planning groups, we have the IWMP2, which is the Integrated Water Master Plan and the second version. So that's how we determine what size diameters of especially large water we're going to need further out in Aurora and as development comes in. So this site was originally going to develop and just put in 8 and 12-inch sanitary lines for themselves. But when they come in to develop, we say, oh, actually, in that exact area, we were going to put a 12 or 15-inch sanitary, so just slightly larger, and then it would serve not just your property, but it could provide a regional benefit to this area. So it's something that we were already planning on and is typically budgeted for in the capital improvements plan. However, if this developer is already going to put something there, if they could just do a slightly larger, we reimburse them the cost difference in size from the 8-inch to the 12-inch, for example. So this is something that we're already budgeted for and planned for, but they're just going to do it, so we're just going to reimburse them a little bit. It's a lot less work on our end, and there's a great benefit to the utility. For things that are too far out or we wouldn't reimburse, those are typically up to the supervisors or higher up in the organization, which projects qualify for this as they come in.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, just wanted to, I remember the first time I saw one of these, I was like, why are we giving these developers all this money? So it's just helpful to understand that context. All right, so anything else on that item before we move on?
Nope.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And our next item is miscellaneous matters for consideration. Do we have any miscellaneous matters?
I just have a question on future agenda items.
Yes, please go ahead.
So thank you for that. One thing we're planning to bring, I think we have scheduled next month, is part one of kind of a two-part deep dive into the status of our water supplies. So we've got, we're going to go over the Colorado River situation, details on kind of how we're doing with future water supply. Part two, currently we have titled growing intentionally or growth with intention or something. But part two, we need to get into, we'll provide an overview of how we've tried to establish policy to grow wisely in the water space. Some things we have in mind that we need to bring, and there are some policy questions we need to bring forward, like how do we deal with future extraterritorial requests or future annexation requests outside of our planning area boundary or those kind of things.
Good.
So we want to tighten things up a little bit more to provide better future certainty for the city. So we've got that two-part presentation coming. Part one will probably take about half an hour. Part two might go a little bit longer.
We also have the history of wild horse coming next month. Sarah's going to give that presentation. And, we have actually quite a few items coming next month.
Yeah, so next month is a little bit heavier lift. And again, we'll probably start some pretty good discussions.
Yeah.
Relative to where we want to go policy wise.
Well, I'm glad we're doing the growth policy because, as you know, I get, and I'm sure other council members get questions about how is it that we keep growing and do we have enough water? And it's so complicated to answer that question. So, no, I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, and we're planning on we had started a process when Councilman Sundberg was chair of a large water user guide that we'll incorporate into part 2, which kind of sets criteria for how much water different parcels can use, which would limit high intense water uses. They wouldn't be able to come into our system. We discourage those now, but this would establish policy that says here are the criteria. We did that last week, Councilman Sundberg, again, when he was chair or coming off of his chair rotation, was invited by Niagara to go tour the Niagara facility. So
I saw the Facebook post.
yeah. So Councilman Cassaw and Councilman Gardner toured Niagara. I joined them. Alex was there and Shawnee was there. They hit us a few days later with a request to expand their facility.
No way.
Yeah. So that's why the tour invitation went out. But that has direct implications, especially with that large water user guide. So we need to figure out on that. We can either respond with a no, we don't have the water. What I'm debating a little bit, and I'd be curious what you all think. They, as you recall, didn't really pay their fair burden on the system when they came in because our old fee structure was so outdated. What I'm debating responding to them with is okay, you can expand, but here's the fee it would cost you to expand, which would be tens of millions of dollars. And in order to consider this, you would have to get current on your prior burden. So you would have to pay for the water use that you never paid for before and paying it. But so that'd be over $50 million. So they would not be happy with that. You all would hear from them if we respond that way.
Do we know? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, do we know, did they get any kind of incentive when it was established?
Understanding is they did. I wasn't here,
Yeah.
but so would have to verify. I think they did get some incentive.
So, yeah, so it would be tough, I think, for council to be, I should say, on their side when they're a large water user, they have not paid their fair share, and they possibly got an incentive.
Yeah, I think my thought on that issue, and maybe we can, if you want to bring something formal for discussion and decision, or we can just kind of leave it here, is no, right? We are focusing on water use for the growth of residents and businesses, and a business that their role is basically simply to consume water. Is not a prudent decision for us to, or a prudent type of business for us to support as a city with the needs that we have and the amount that we're investing just to support the residents and businesses that we currently have. Like, I'd rather tell them no than give them a totally justified, but to them, outrageous number and have it turn into a whole hullabaloo.
Yeah, and part of why I'm a little bit torn is because they didn't really pay appropriately the burden on the system before. This would be an opportunity to potentially recover that, I think they would be offended by that idea and call complaining, but it could establish, this is not the first time they've come and asked to expand. So we've told them no a couple of times before, but we didn't put anything formally in writing. And we didn't go down this path of you need to make the system whole for us to consider any kind of additional use. So that's sort of why I'm a little torn.
Is water even taxed? The water's not even taxed. The water
Yeah.
bottle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do we maybe
Fully-
bring something up for April?
Doesn't come back to the system because it's going into bottles, right?
Correct. And the way we're addressing that, so there were two problems when Niagara first came in. One, the connection fee, the way it was built assumed that large meters only saw flow for 8 hours a day, not 24 hours a day, essentially. So the volume of water assumed to go through the meter was way off. So they paid about a $20 million connection fee that at the time, the value of the water itself was about 50 million. So they were 30 million short in 2012 dollars, I think, was what we looked at. The other problem is that they fully consume the water. So the way our rates are set up is it assumes a lot of the water comes back to us and we're able to recapture it and reuse it over and over again. So that's kind of a rate component versus the fee component of acquiring water. So how we've addressed that with them and other large users that consume water is we don't give them a sewer exception. So for example, if you or I use well, we wouldn't be good examples. If a customer historically, way back when, knew that they weren't putting water in the sewer system, they would request an exception to their sewer billing and put meters in to calculate how much water was going to the sewer, and we would bill them for a lesser volume. But we canceled that policy years ago, recognizing that the loss of the water resource to the water side wasn't being recovered. When we looked at the cost difference generally, the conclusion was it was pretty close to a wash if we didn't give them a sewer exception and just charge them the full sewer rate. So how that works is they use millions of gallons a month in water, but they only send a teeny bit back to the sewer. But we charge them as if they're sending millions of gallons back to the sewer. And that's how we recover the costs. The other complication with what they do is the loading back to the sewer is very unhealthy loading for a sewer system. There's no biological loading, which sewer treatment likes the biological food. They send salt back to the system, which the biological process hates. So it actually isn't helpful to the sewer treatment process either. Now that's kind of diluted out, but if the more and more we see of that in the future, the more and more that will become problematic for us. So there's a couple of things we've done there that are interesting. We've offset the water loss or consumption through our sewer rate, but we've not ever, and nor do we have a process to ever recover the lack of connection fees we charge them. Unless we were to say, hey, sure, pay a sewer connection fee that you should have paid the first time, plus whatever you would owe us again in the future. But the reason I'm saying it would probably be over 50 million is we know the shortfall before was 30 million already. So without any additional excess use, that started owing us 30 million. I will say the other complication we have is it's a little difficult to, we've set allocations now. You all supported us fixing allocations in our system, which is very helpful. But so there's no great way for us to not let them use additional water. The mechanism is if they exceed the allocation, their rates go way up to help us recover the costs, but we don't actually have a good way to cut anybody off or say you can't use any more water.
Oh,
That's a struggle we don't know how to fix that with our allocations. So we've got financial protection, but we don't necessarily have water supply protection there, if that makes sense.
and that was their original agreement. I mean, it wasn't in their agreement to say you're limited.
Yeah, I got here in 2012, right after Gaylord and Niagara had come. And we quickly scrambled to fix a few things to avoid huge subsidies coming from ratepayers to those two entities. So that's when we started changing things to implement allocations. We did have the ability or the authority to apply allocations to Gaylord and Niagara. They're not happy about those necessarily, but we did do that. So it avoids additional subsidy from ratepayers, which is good, but it doesn't necessarily prohibit high water use. It just financially penalizes high water use. And by the way, Gaylord, since I brought them up, one of their allocations is actually zero. They have no allocation.
They have no allocation.
For their outdoor irrigation, I think.
Outdoor irrigation.
Yeah, they're supposed to.
They didn't pay any fees when they
Paid
first
no
came on
fee
board.
with the incentive agreement that they signed.
So no sales tax from Gaylord for 30 years, no lodger's tax, and they didn't have to pay all the water
They
fees.
had the incentive agreement was fascinating for Gaylord. It charged them a capped connection fee, but the cap was based on some very interesting things, not actual water use. So what we were able to do with that through a number of interesting discussions or negotiations was say, okay, we'll give you an allocation for your indoor use based on the fee you paid, but it doesn't cover any of your outdoor use. So you have a zero allocation. So they're paying for their outdoor use 3 times the rate that other commercial customers are.
Oh,
So we are financially
right.
recovering the lack of a connection fee there, but it's going to take us 50 to 100 years to actually recover on that. So, and there were 2 interesting arrangements that we have.
Well, yeah, do we want to maybe bring something for April to make a formal decision that then can be sent in writing to Niagara, either a like, no, we're not doing this, or a yes, we'll do it with X, Y, and Z conditions and additional costs.
Yes, and would the committee be comfortable if maybe what we could do is I could respond back to them, or we could respond back to them and ask them if they would, with this request, would they be willing to make up the lack of fees they paid associated with their initial they actually had the initial development and then they expanded once, which we didn't know about. Well, we knew about it after the fact, but and we could somehow craft that to ask if they are willing to consider paying those lack of fees, then we could bring a recommendation to the policy committee on what we do. Would that make sense?
They're going to say no.
They may, but then we could bring something anyway. I think they might want a response before then.
Okay, yeah, why don't we do that? Ask them if they're even willing to entertain it. If they say no, then that's our answer, right? Then we say no. I mean, still bring the item so that we can have that discussion. But ultimately, if they're not willing to make up that cost and make the utility whole, then likely the answer is no. But let's ask them so that we also aren't wasting the time speculating. I think that makes sense because it also gives them some kind of an idea prior to April.
I like that also because it's consistent.
I think she's just muting.
It's also consistent with how we're communicating with Gaylord right now, who has also come in and requested some expansions, and we've told them, okay, theirs is a little different because it's geographically expanding their site and has new uses. And we've said, well, okay, we get that you need to expand. Here's what you need to pay, but we also need you to make up where you haven't paid fees in the past. So we would treat the two consistently. Mayor.
Right. Go ahead and do that. And yeah, and expect to have that conversation at least about the Niagara in April and maybe Gaylord as well. I don't know.
Councilmember Coombs, it looks like the mayor maybe has a question.
Mayor, please go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Coombs. Marshall, could you tell us a little bit more about that Niagara expanded without the permission of the city? And I assume that there was an increased usage of water in that expansion?
Yeah, they expanded, they added a second production line, and that was part of why I wanted to go on the tour, was to see exactly what they'd done.
Okay.
So they increased their ability, well, their water use and their production out of the facility. They did it through adding equipment. So I don't know that would they have to have gotten a permit for adding a second bottling machine?
Oh, there probably would have been some building permits, but if there's no suggestion to an increase in the meter size,
Yep.
it wouldn't have necessarily gone to Aurora Water for review.
Yeah, so the water use that resulted from their expansion fit within their existing meter,
Okay.
which is why we learned about it after the fact when their use went up.
Mhm.
I don't think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think their water treatment portion of their facility stayed the same. They just were able to push more water through it. And then they added a second bottling machine that puts the water in the bottles. And they manufacture the bottles on site too, which is kind of interesting. So their facility, if you guys haven't been out there, is a little bit fascinating. The water treatment portion of what they do out there is a few hundred square feet. It's teeny. That huge facility is primarily a warehouse for what they've produced, and it's got all these machines that build the bottles and put the water in the bottles. So that's what they're doing out there. It was definitely interesting to see.
Right.
Their water treatment process is really simple and straightforward. It's just an RO facility. So they
just take our water,
Mhm.
do something and
Yeah.
put something in it and then throw it in a bottle.
They literally, they take our water, they do run it through granular activated carbon as kind of a pre-treatment, and then they put it through RO, which basically takes everything out of the water. You have almost pure water on the back end. Then they put most of the minerals that they took out back in. They put it in the bottles and they ship it out. So one of my questions to them, I said, have you ever looked at the minerals you're taking out compared to the minerals you're putting back in? And They haven't ever looked at that. They've never even thought about looking at that. The production manager out there didn't even believe that they put minerals back in all the water. He's like, I don't even know. We have 3 blends. 2 of them are proprietary, so we don't even know what minerals are in them. The other one is our in-house stuff, so we could find that out. But I don't even think we put minerals back in all the water, which they almost for sure do. If any of you have tasted RO water, you can buy it as distilled water. You can buy essentially the same thing as distilled water, and it tastes nasty. So nobody's going to buy that as drinking water. Anyway.
Okay, so how long have we had the policy of not having any more bottlers in the city?
Yeah, we have not we've had our large, our large water user guide we created a year and a half ago. Yeah, let's say 2 years, year and a half, 2 years ago. Right now it's built into our design standards though. So it's technically more of a procedure than it is a policy, or it's a staff policy. What we want to do this year is have council formalize it as a governing body policy, which is a lot better for us.
Yeah.
But that's only been a couple of years where we've had that guide. Part of why we created that guide a couple of years ago, though, was because prior to that, we had turned away others. We told them we don't have the water supply. Primarily how they had been discouraged to come in was that the connection fees had been fixed. And so they would have been looking at $50-80 million connection fees, and they didn't want to pay the connection fees.
So why is Denver Water have a different policy, do you think?
A couple of reasons. One, Denver Water has old historic water rights. So, and they have more water than they have demand for. And so the best way to illustrate that is Denver Water doesn't even have to recapture and reuse any of their water. They have so many water supplies that they have not ever had to do that. So they've kind of given some of that away in the past. They're trying to claw that back, or they have a couple of times. They are thinking about how do they build a reuse system and start recapturing and reusing water, but they haven't done that. They don't have the need because they have enough water supply to meet the entirety of their existing customer base, plus some. They have some cushion, so they're able to add additional uses. The other thing that's going on in Denver that's interesting, and you see this with redevelopment areas, typically when areas redevelop in downtown areas, the water uses go down per geographic area. The densities go up, but outdoor irrigation, keep in mind in Colorado, is about half of our use, and they really create efficiencies in the outdoor use. And so water use generally goes down in the West when you redevelop and build additional density, heightened density. Okay. So not only did they start with some excess supplies, technically, as they're redeveloping, they're probably gaining a little bit of additional of their supply back. So they're in a very different position. Denver and Pueblo are the two entities, municipalities that are kind of in that situation where they've got plenty of water they've got rights to enough water to do whatever they think they want to right now. Denver is recognizing they need to be wiser for their far out planning, but again, they've got enough where they don't have to be too careful right now.
Okay.
So that's why we saw Pepsi and Coca-Cola build right across the border in Denver. They did come talk to us, at least one of the two talked to us. I think they both did. And we said, yeah, no, here's our fee. And no, we're not going to give you incentives. And they said, well, Denver will, and so we'll go to Denver, built right over there.
Right.
We'll have fun. I'm gonna become even more popular.
Fascinating that we have them here.
Yeah, I say let the other folks go ahead and use their water in that way. That is not an approach I think we should take. But all right, so with that being said, the plan is you'll communicate with them and then bring something back here for a formal decision based on what they say. And then we'll move forward from there. All right, any other miscellaneous matters?
Can we get an update on the, what do we call it? Roxborough
Oh, Dominion.
Dominion, yeah.
Yes. We need to bring that back as well. So we'll bring back a detailed presentation. I will say, with you all's support, they basically conceded everything we told them they need to. So we did make a concession in that we are allowing one of the volumes of water that they have. So they have a 570 agreement, a 230 agreement, and a 250 agreement. And the 570 agreement will still expire when it was scheduled to, which is 2028. So that's not changing. The 230 volume of water, we are making a concession to let it go through our rampart system longer than the agreement mandated. That was their one desperate ask, I guess. But we shifted the 250 over to the WISE system like it was contemplated. And we are expiring the agreements. We got them out of the Rampart system. We fixed the revenues. They were generally okay anyway. That wasn't one of our big concerns, but they've agreed to all of our major things we needed them to. And as a result, we did make basically the one concession on the 230 agreement.
But are they building the infrastructure that they're supposed to?
They are claiming they're trying to acquire the property they need to build a turnout on the South Platte. That could still get interesting. The agreements basically say that has to be done by, is it
2028, 2030, 2028, which, or it might have been, so now that we've changed it, moved the 250 to Rampart, the South Platte diversion becomes less important. But as long as the 230 is going through Rampart, they need to build the South Platte. They also need to put in that stick for the WISE infrastructure, stick of pipe.
Right, and that might be the piece you were talking
Yeah.
about. So they've agreed to do that immediately.
Oh, okay.
So
It's
they did
8/31 this year.
Yeah,
So,
they've only got a couple more months they better be doing that right now.
yeah.
Because they did concede to put that in to be able to take deliveries through the WISE system. So that was key. And so the one thing that could become, they can do that piece of infrastructure, the turnout on the South Platte, they don't have the property for, they don't have the approval for, that would have to go through Water Court, right?
And it would have to go through Denver Water.
And it has to go through Denver.
And their conversations with Denver Water are apparently not going very well. They seem to be at odds, and because Waterton Canyon, Denver Water is very protective over, and Denver has been, at least according to the people we talked to in Denver, Denver Water has said, how does Denver Water benefit from you putting a diversion structure here? And there's been no answer to that question. So Denver has been
So that,
to allow them.
with the way the agreements are drafted, if there's a future challenge, that would probably be it. Again, the 570 goes away completely.
Mhm.
The 250 can route through the WISE infrastructure. It has an emergency clause where the 230, upon our approval, could also route through the WISE infrastructure, was how we dealt with that. If they don't get the turnout, so we're protected in the agreements and what they've agreed to, we feel comfortable with. But the history with Dominion has been when things don't go quite like they hope, maybe conversations with Denver, they tend to come back. So I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years from now, they're back saying, oh, we didn't get our turnout built. Can you please let the 230 go through Rampart instead of WISE? But the way the agreements are drafted, the emergency exception would route it through WISE, unless WISE is not available. So it's in our best interest to make sure WISE is always available, or we could get an emergency request to deliver through Rampart, which we're not excited about.
So our goal is to have the documents, the new agreement drafted by the end of this month and bring it to water policies for you all to look at it and hopefully move it forward. That's our goal, but it's kind of a tight timeline, so it may be April, but that's our goal, is to have it done by the end of this month.
Yeah, and it's important to have all that done, contractually or whatever, so that 5 years from now, it's like, here's.
Yeah. Consolidated,
Yeah.
straightforward. Yes, so thank you all for your support on that. It was only after they heard from you all that they shifted into a cooperative space. So thank you.
Okay, any other miscellaneous matters? All right, seeing none, our next meeting is scheduled for March 19th at 10:30 a.m. Are there any concerns with that time?
Nope.
All right, seeing none, we will go ahead and confirm that that's the time of our next meeting. I will plan to come in person, and hopefully it's not too cold. And with that, we will go ahead and adjourn. So thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you.